Well, hello, class. How are you today? I would like to welcome you to our second in the virtual field trip category. Before we begin today's lesson, I'd like to remind you that the current event and quiz number 4 are due today. Due next week, you have the virtual field trip number 1. Hydrology of Boyd Hill report due. The extra credit, which is due before you take the final exam, is a barrier island at Fort DeSoto study. I feel that it's important because barrier islands are our main coastal habitat here in the Tampa Bay area. To take the time to go over it and allow you to earn extra credit by attending the virtual field trip. So the first thing I'd like to do is go over your field trip report. So if you choose to do it, you can earn your extra credit. So the barrier islands are bar-billed estuaries on steroids. The bar-billed estuaries are formed from sandbars, and then runoff gives a fresh water between that sandbar and ocean or gulf. Well, the barrier islands were formed by glaciers, glacial retreat, erosion, deposition. So all this sediment was deposited and then shaped by the waves and longshore currents, shaped by waves and longshore currents. So they're parallel to the coast, and they are huge estuaries. So where are they? They're elongated islands. They're parallel to the shore. They're on the Atlantic and Gulf Coast, not Pacific, because the Pacific has plate tectonics, very narrow shelf. Also, the rocky terrain of the Pacific, we're flat. We got the large coastal plains. We, on the East Coast, have had more deposition, Mississippi River, the whole basin there, the drainage basin. So our passive boundary is where they have built up in the shallows. They wouldn't fare too well in the Pacific because the shelf's too narrow, the currents are too strong, the waves are too large because it's not shallow, and there's limited drainage pattern there from the mountains, coastal mountains. So our East Coast, Atlantic, Gulf Coast. The estuaries are the intracoastals and the wetlands. They form from the glacial deposition and then shaped by currents and waves. The seaward side, which would be the Gulf here or the Atlantic, they're beach, sand deposition. The smaller sediments, the silts and the clays, are all washed away by waves. So it's very sandy. If it were stronger, like up north a little bit, they tend to be rockier. So the smaller sediments generally get washed away on the seaward side. On the landward side, you have deposition because the waves aren't coming in. You just have ebbs and flows of the tide, and that deposits fine sediments. So you have the beach on the seaward side, and you have mangroves, you have salt marsh on the seaward side. You may even have mud flats at low tide, exposed mud, and you probably have seagrasses growing in the estuary that lies between the island and the coast. So humans impact it because we build on these islands: tourism, beach, recreation. Interestingly, the Intracoastal Waterways have a dredged shipping channel. This dredged shipping channel dates back to World War II. Most commerce is handled on the oceans. It's a whole lot cheaper to float heavy payload than it is to drive it in trucks. So most huge industries ships packages on large ocean ships. Now, during World War II, Germany utilized the U-boat, which we know as submarines, and they were bombing our ships to cripple the economy and make the war effort more difficult. We were losing a lot of our commerce. Our solution was to dredge the Intracoastal Waterways. So we dredged out channels. They were confined, protected by barrier islands. The only way in and out were passes, and passes could be monitored by sonar. So we did that as a solution to stop the crippling attack on America during World War II and bolster the economy. So our Intracoastal Waterways, which go all the way around the East Coast and all the way through the Gulf coasts, have a dredged shipping channel that we now use for recreation, and we keep that channel fairly clear. It also built up a lot of what we call spoil islands. The spoil islands are man-made islands from dredging, which provide a lot of habitat. So these barrier islands in the Intracoastal Waterways are key ecosystems on the East Coast of the United States and the Gulf Coast all the way around. They are the cradles of the sea, where about 80 to 85% of organisms breed in these estuaries. They're very salty estuaries because the majority of their influence is tidal, ebbing and flowing in and out of the passes, but there is enough freshwater influence from runoff to make it brackish water, technically. If you start at the Gulf for us, and we'll call that Gulf or the ocean on the other coast, that's near shore, okay? Near shore, all the way to the coast, and then you get beach. That beach terminates at the dune. So you can have beach. The forebeach is the part in the tides that ebbs and flows. So sometimes it's exposed and sometimes it's not. The back beach is the sand behind it. And then the beaches terminate with dunes. Dunes are mounds of sand covered with plants. Behind the dunes, you generally have a flat area, which is scrub. The scrub, we commonly have cabbage palms and sea grapes. Cabbage palm, incidentally, is Florida state tree. Sea grapes. On the dunes, you typically have beach sunflowers and sea oats and things like that holding the dunes together. As you move away from the scrub, you start to get mixed hardwoods. It's sometimes referred to as a hammock. I refer to it as maritime forest. When that forest terminates and you're getting back toward the back end of those islands, you get more scrub. And then you have your tidal flats area. On the tidal flats, you get your mangroves here. If you go a little further north, mangroves don't survive. Mangroves are a group of trees that are really unrelated, but they have the ability to manage salt balance, making them perfect for these tropical intracoastal areas. A little bit of subtropics like us. We only have 3 species of mangroves. There's many more species worldwide. We have 3 very hardy species here. And then lastly, you have your salt marshes, which cover most of the East Coast. We do have spotty salt marsh. We have more mangroves here, but there are some salt marshes. If you go an hour north, you're going to have all salt marsh. very little mangrove. And then once you pass the freeze line, no more mangroves, and you get all salt marsh. And then you always have your intracoastal, that estuary that's between the continent and the islands. Here, our intracoastals are dominated by seagrass. Now, there are videos, and then the information will complete the trip report, and your trip report is, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations. So you should describe each location. You don't necessarily have to go the date and time because it's videotaped. That would be if we were there live. Just describe briefly the weather and any other abiotic factors that coincide with the area. The beach, obviously, abiotic factor would be the sand and the waves. The mangrove swamp, your abiotic factor would be lack of waves. You know, you'd have tides and more of a muddy substrate. Substrate refers to the soil. So a brief description on each of the locations. The Tampa Bay shipping channel, we discussed that. That's a unique area. We discuss it with the Skyway in the background because we do have cruise ships that enter our bay. So we have a deep, over 30-meter channel, which allows for pelagics or deep water fish to enter our shipping channel that normally wouldn't be here. So there's interesting things in the video regarding that. So you got your location. Now your species list. Each video, I discuss a few organisms and make sure you list them in the habitat that they're found in. That would be Battery Bigelow, North Beach, mangrove swamp, through there. Whether it's a producer, consumer, or decomposer, we did talk about the algae plant producers, consumers eat, decomposers, and then a brief description of the organism. If you use the internet websites for any of these, you have to include that in our references. And then these questions should be answered in full sentences. Please make it a separate report. Don't take this and jam answers in there, but make it a separate report with a cover and a reference page at the end if you use references. Again, this formal lab report will be due before you take your final exam for up to 5 extra credit points tacked onto your final grade. That is optional. Today's lesson on Fort DeSoto and the Intracoastal Waterways is one of the more interesting, hopefully topics that we'll cover this semester. It stems from the marine biology class that we have here at the college, OCB 1000C. We take a lot of field trips and study these things extensively. So we'll begin with an overhead view of Tampa Bay. That's us. You can see there's Pinellas. Here's Fort DeSoto, Egmont Key, and our barrier islands. You see that white stripe? That's beach. Remember, the Gulf side has beach, and the inside of them, there's some green up there, has seawalls where people have impacted it, but generally mangroves. Look at all those mangrove forests right there, and salt marsh, low tide mud flats. So these finger islands aren't really natural. They've been made by dredging. But you can see our barrier island system going up. Now, our aerial view of Tampa Bay, let's take a quick look at the drainage basin. Drainage basin or watershed, all this material here, whatever happens here, drains into our bay and ultimately our Gulf. This leads to a problem that we know as eutrophication. That is nutrient pollution that causes algal blooms. These algal blooms, as the algae dies, starves the water for oxygen. So nutrients, which we generally view as a good thing, become a bad thing when there's too much of them. But look at our drainage basin. So Pinellas, Hillsborough, Manatee, a little bit of Sarasota, a little bit of Polk, a little bit of Pasco, all drain into our bay. Now in the 70s, as we had uncontrolled growth, Tampa Bay Buccaneers came here. People from the north were retiring and coming to Tampa Bay in record numbers. We did not have the sewage treatment at the time, and sewage contains nitrates and phosphates, nutrients. So these nitrates and phosphates polluted our bay, causing extensive algal growth, depleting our fish, depleting our seagrass beds, and causing environmental damage that has taken decades to recover from. So barrier island, we know, elongated accumulations. It's separated from the mainland by open water. That's our intracoastals, which are estuaries, bays. You know, most texts refer to them as lagoons, but most people refer to them as the intracoastals. So that's what they are. All around the East Coast, you have an extensive barrier island chain. Our barrier islands, if you look at them, your beach, dunes in the back. Here you'd have your scrub, forest, scrub, and then you have mangrove, seagrass, depending on where you are, and then you have your mainland. So we classify it into the near shore, the beach / dune, our barrier flats, highland would be our maritime forest, and then your tidal flats and your estuary and lagoon. This is kind of the order from Gulf, oceanside to intracoastal. So the near shores first, it has a lot of sandbars. Sandbars are formed the same way the barrier islands were, except small scale, you know, storms and waves carve out and redistribute sand, and the longshore current pushes it along. They develop parallel to shore. Our local beaches, which are the first land portion of the barrier island, in Pinellas County, our sand comes from the end of the last ice age, and then it's mixed with our limestone bedrock, making it light colored, algae and shells crumpled in there. Beaches have a profile. This is what beaches look like. Here's your longshore bar. Remember, near shore, you got your little longshore bar, that little trough carved by waves spilling over. And then on your beach face, you know, high tide, low tide, we call that the foreshore, the area between the tides. Then you have the back shore. Generally speaking, it's separated by a notch called the rack line. And then you have your dunes in the back. So this littoral means between the tides. No, actually littoral means shallow enough for sunlight. The foreshore is between your tides. So this is what this side profile of your typical beach looks like. Bays and the intracoastals have less waves to no waves, and that's why the small sediments build up there. The open coasts, like our beach, has a lot stronger waves, so small sediments do not build up there. The berms, which are mostly above water, have a crest and then a little face or a scarp, and that notch, you can see right there's that notch, fills up with debris called a rack, W-R-A-C-K, rack line. Behind the beach, you have your dunes and wind, sea breezes pushing sand, being trapped by plants, sea oats, sea grapes, beach sunflower. Very important to not damage these plants. That's why many of them are protected by law, not because they're rare, but because they're important. Behind that, you have your flats. There's your cabbage palm, our state tree, wax myrtle, palmetto, various fast-growing herbaceous plants. Many times you have a low-lying area back there that fills up with salt, and that's called a saltern or a salt meadow. This area is the saltiest place on the beach because all you get is the evaporation, and then salt just builds up over time. Eventually, you get your highland, and that's your maritime forest. Here's live oak. You do have an understory, but you get a mixed hardwoods that are salt tolerant. You would have another right behind it as you move back toward the water, some more scrub. And then our next zone is the mangroves. Mangroves build up in layers. Not salt tolerance layers, because white mangroves are the most salt tolerant, but water tolerance. The red mangroves right there, the ones closest to the edge, generally have prop roots. The Native Americans called them walking trees, but they're prop roots. That keeps them up high and allows them to stay out of the water. Black mangroves are generally found behind them. They have pneumatophore roots. These pneumatophore roots aerate the soil. The white mangroves behind them. And then we'd have buttonwoods behind there. Buttonwoods are not classified as mangroves, but they are found associated behind the mangroves, and they're very similar to mangroves. Mangroves are just trees that actively remove salt in some way, shape, or form. Does not mean the buttonwoods couldn't be a mangrove. We just haven't discovered how they handle salt tolerance yet. So here's red mangroves, the walking trees. They help build islands up because those roots trap sediment. Those roots also provide cover for smaller fish. So that's one of the reasons why they're the cradles, because all these little fish go swimming around in the mangroves to avoid predators. There's the pneumatic roots of the black mangrove. And the white mangroves have these nectaries at the base of their leaves. They don't have aerial roots like the other two, but they remove salt from these nectaries. The buttonwoods, which is our next image, there's our buttonwoods. Are they mangroves? I don't know. That's why I put the question there. They may regulate salt. I don't know. But here, that's why they're called the buttonwoods, because they're flowers and then their seeds look like little buttons. They're very common growing behind the white mangrove line. In areas that are exposed that don't have mangroves, and all the way up the East Coast outside of Florida, we tend to have salt marsh grass. Salt marsh grass is spartina. The high marsh up here, a smaller species of spartina, because spartina is a genus, by the way, because it gets less nutrients. The low marsh gets more nutrients because it's closer to the water. You get a little higher spartina growth. And then your mud flats are at extreme low tides, get a lot of burrowing into the soft sediments, and then subtidal are the channels that never go dry. So here's salt marsh, extensive meadows, given tides during high tide. Mud flats are exposed only during the lowest of tide. And here's pictures of our salt marsh grass, spartina, and that is a genus, spartina. Subtidal is below the intratidal, high and low tide. So it's shallow, but you only get, it doesn't get exposed. That's where your seagrasses dominate here. Now, spoil islands, like I said, are islands that were built by the spoils of the dredging that we still do, but when we created the intracoastals, we made tons of these islands. This is Compass Key. It is named Compass Key because it had a magnetic pole and ships would align, because there's a Coast Guard station here, they would align their compasses, this was before GPS, with that magnetic pole. If you go to Compass Key, and it really is a spoil island, that pole, there's remnants of it all rusty right there. There's it also was named One Tree Key. Interestingly enough, that's an Australian pine. Australian pines are invasives. We brought them in, so it's kind of weird to call them invasives, but they're invasive. They grow really well, really fast, but look how shallow their roots are. They don't stop erosion. And when the wind blows, they fall down. That can cause damage. So we loved Australian pines and put a bunch of them in Fort DeSoto and all over our beaches. And then they started to fall down and we're like, oops, big mistake. So we spent millions to plant them and millions to remove them. And then we have our intracoastal waterway filled with seagrass. Other thing that grow on the intracoastal are oysters. Oysters, they clean our water. We use them. These are domes set up. See, there's an oyster dome. We set up these domes, oysters grow, and that helps trap sediment, provides habitat, and then stop erosion. So the oyster domes reduce erosion. We actively put them out there, like MacDill Air Force Base contract. They were losing 6 inches a year. They contracted with the state to abate erosion, and these oyster domes were put out there, stop the waves, trap sediment, and they got their land re-sediment and expanded their land base. So our healthy seagrass beds are what dominate these intracoastal zones. There's a scallop, that's an indicator species. That means the water's clean. They don't live in that dirty water. We had a thriving scallop industry until about the 70s when we had that pollution problem. Now scallops are coming back because Tampa Bay is a lot cleaner now than it has been in the last 50 years. Our local seagrass beds are the turtle grass, which are thick, the manatee grass, which are long and cylindrical, and shoal grass. If you were to take marine biology, we'd go out and we'd pick all these different grasses, and you'd learn how to identify them, and you'd learn where they grew in the intracoastals, because they also layer, most things do. Now, barrier islands are great because they help break down waves and currents. They slow our winds down. They are affected by sea level changes and storms. Storms cut passes into them and erode them. Our development of barrier islands, here's St. Pete Beach, which is a barrier island. You can see back here's the intracoastal. Here's the beach, our high energy. This is our impact on the barrier islands right here. We constantly battle with them, with Mother Nature, to fight erosion. Longshore currents coming this way, we build up a jetty, it traps the sediment, and then we have to re-nourish it. Here's beach, this barge is pumping and redistributing sand. So we're always fighting erosion. And again, most of them are about 7,000 years old. We've been doing a good job with seagrass recovery because organizations like Tampa Bay Watch have been replanting seagrass, replanting salt marsh, building oyster domes. No wake zones cut down a lot of damage because a prop scar can take a decade to heal. These things aren't fast growing. And sewage treatment is one of the largest ways to on bay recovery. Another one is fertilization. We have laws in place now that only allow fertilization during certain seasons. And this, of course, has helped with our recovery. So Tampa has been successful in recovering its seagrass beds. Offshore, once you get past all that tidal influence, here, because we have limestone, our platform, we have what we call Swiss cheese bottoms. That's little outcrops of limestone, and those are hard bottoms. They provide habitat for attachment, and then creatures live all throughout them. So that is the science behind a barrier island. Now let's take a look at some pictures from different trips and learn some of the creatures that live on them. All right, near shore, these dolphins, they love to play in a boat's wake. They actually kind of weird. Our only dolphins, the Atlantic bottlenose. Occasionally we get a whale, a pilot whale or something entering our waters, but we do have the Atlantic bottlenose, and you can get them to jump around in your boat wake. They do like to play. We have a species of Manta Ray we call the Devil Ray here. That's how Tampa Bay got its original baseball name, the Devil Rays. Our Gulf manta rays are a lot smaller than Atlantic or Pacific manta rays. You can see that these guys have they kind of like a kite. They don't have a stinging barb. Manta rays do not. So our most common ray like that would be the cow nose. We see those all the time, the cow nose rays. And then of course we do have the stingrays as well. A ray is in the same group of fish as sharks. They're called chondrichthyes, but they have a cartilaginous skeleton, no bones. The only hard part are their teeth. Rays kind of have sieve-like teeth, they crunch. They're not jagged and sharp like a shark's. Here is a moon jellyfish, and jellyfish often have fish that live in association with them, and they're called Medusa fish. So the moon jelly, they can get to be, I've seen them 18 inches in diameter, maybe a bit more, and they're common in our Gulf waters. This is an actual spoil island out in St. Joe Sound. So we have a ton of these spoil islands all around us. Remember, they're really young. They're from the 1940s, generally, made from the dredging. Now we do have tide pools. This one has some mangroves and a little bit of salt marsh. See the grass in the foreground here, Fort DeSoto. The beach is out here. So this is behind the beach, and the intracoastals are right here. The dunes, here's dunes colonized by sea oats. You can see the sea oats here. Behind it is some scrub, some seaside purslane. This is that beach sunflower here and here. And this is bad. This is, notice these alternating leaves. Here you have a little bit of the fruit. That is the Brazilian pepper, also called Florida holly. That is a invasive that is one of the more dangerous invasives that we have in our area. In our tide pool around there, we also have some purslane. This is a little auger. There's a big auger nursery there. It's kind of cool. Here's a banded tulip. There's your auger nursery. There's hundreds of them in the intercoastals. You can see there's the sandbar. Here's your tide pool. There's the Gulf. Here's some feeding pelicans and barnacles. Here's a little Australian pine and a little mangrove trying to make it. They're not going to survive. These ones aren't, because they're not quite in the right habitat. They're a little too far away from where they thrive. These guys thrive in the scrub, but this is like a little salt flat here. It's not going to make it. These guys thrive in the intercoastals. You can see there's some dead salt marsh grass as well. This is a very dry area, so this is not close enough to the water to pull it off, but they try. A lot of the things that wash up, if you were to take marine biology, we'd learn how to identify them all, but we're just going to look at them because to me, one of the greatest perks of my job is when I go to the beach, I like to collect shells, and I know what they are. I love to take pictures of birds, and I know what they are. I love to fish, and I know what they are. So to me, you take a marine biology class and you learn all these things, and you're hooked for life. Naturalist is one of the most fun things you can do in this state. No one knows everything, and occasionally I run across something I'm stumped, and I've been at this for decades. But it is so much fun to learn this stuff, I got to tell you. So here's your sunray Venus. Venus is actually a genus of clam, and there's a few different Venuses. That's the sunray. You see how it gets its name, kind of looks like sun's rays. This scallop, it has little wings. This is the bay scallop. This is the one that we eat. Not too prevalent around here yet. Coquina, calico scallops, they're a lot smaller. They're more of an offshore, but there's tons of them all over the beach. Real pretty from that colors, different colors. This is a slipper snail, and you can see it has this partition in there. We get a lot of sandpipers. We got willets and sanderlings and dunlins, and they run around, and they're like little sewing machines, go boop, 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 looking for coquina and things like that along the beach. There's our crossbar Venuses and Cardias and the incongruous arc, cockles and jewel box, kitten's paw right there, razor clam, that's tough to find. The spiny or prickly cockle, you can see along the sides, it's got prickles. The channeled duck clam, sea pens, and shark's eye snails. This used to be called a moon snail, but it's been changed to shark eye because there's another moon snail. Another slipper snail. That's sargassum, where there's Sargasso seas named after. We find that washed up. That's the weed line that the sea turtles love. Lettered olive. And a lot of times you get this stuff growing on the beach, the bacteria and the algae, the blue-green bacteria, blue-green algae. Our mangroves, which we call a mango community, there's our prop roots. Here, growing on them is lichen. Lichen's kind of a, it's an interesting organism. It's two organisms living together as one. You have an algae and a fungus that live as one organism called the lichen. They are both decomposers from the fungus and photosynthesizers from the algae. Here, I don't know if you can see it or not. I'll make it big. There's a crab. This is a mangrove crab. These are all lichens on this. They live only in mangrove trees. So they run around the mangrove trees. Sea whips are our local coral. There's two types of coral, two classes of coral, if you will. The reef building coral, we call hermitipic. This hermitipic coral has algae living in its tissue, so it only grows in shallow, warm water. Then we have solitary coral, and this coral is called ahermitipic. No algae, doesn't form huge reefs, but it's very abundant, and it's abundant in our area. So there's some views of the habitat. There's your beach. You can see the fore beach and then the back beach there. Here's some intracoastal, no waves. Notice you got mud flat during low tide. You can actually see the mud. Here's a sandbar, somebody running on, a lot of birds searching for crustaceans. And here's your mangrove forest. So you got salt marsh, mangrove, beach, sandbar. So those are four distinct Fort DeSoto habitats that we visit. Some of the birds, here's a willet, a royal tern. These guys are sandwich terns. Here's a tricolored heron, a skimmer, and a great blue heron. Here's our stingray, long barb. I've been petted a couple times by them, and they really do hurt. This is why you do the stingray shuffle when you're out in the intercoastals. A lot of times After a real bad cold front, we get cold stun turtles. This one unfortunately didn't make it and washed ashore. When we have really cold snaps, the local aquaria, the Tampa Aquarium and the Clearwater Marine Aquarium get full of turtles that need to be rehabilitated and then released. A lot of times you'll see the foam sitting there, and that's the result of phytoplankton that have been stirred up. These wash ashore. These are egg cases of the lightning whelk snail. All these hold tons of baby snails in them. They attach them to the seagrass beds. Now the maritime forest, which is behind all that, here, this is a part of a maritime forest off of Fort DeSoto. You can see a bald eagle and a eaglet, baby bald eagle. Yeah, it's pretty big, so it's probably 6-8 months old, and does not have the distinguished adult plumage yet. And that nests in a pine tree that has been cleared out. On the Fort DeSoto Arrowhead Trail, you get the prickly pear cactus. This is an epiphyte called an air plant. It belongs to the same group of plants that pineapples belong to, called bromeliads. Slash pine, more lichen. Here's live oak with, that's our main hardwood there. Other things found on the trail here. Here's your other bromeliad, the Spanish moss. Spanish moss is different from the air plant. Notice, see how long and stringy it is compared to the air plant, which is more like a ball. Here's the wax myrtle. It's very shiny. I don't know if you can get that off this picture, but it's got a waxy coating. Different types of palmetto, sawtooth knot. This is the cedar. Cedars are cool. They have this red wood that's very aromatic. Medicine men from Native Americans would refer to that as meat. It's very aromatic, so it has medicine properties. In this case, as the Native Americans used plants, anything was medicinal that had a good use like that. This one, the aromaticness drives off insects. So cedars used in chests and in closets a lot of times to ward off insects like moths that tend to eat cotton. That's why hope chests are made of cedar. Brides used to store their wedding gear in there so it wouldn't get destroyed by insects. Here's some ferns. Ferns are kind of an ancient plant. These ferns sporulate. They reproduce with spores, not seeds. Here's that Brazilian pepper again. You can see it has distinct leaf pattern, 6 and then a terminal leaf, but they're definitely directly across from each other. So you don't need the berries to ID it. You can recognize the leaf pattern. These guys are awesome. This is a male because he has the big fiddler, the fiddler crabs. They'll raise that up, and that's how they attract a lady. This is the resurrection fern. It's an epiphyte growing on one plant growing on another plant. It's called that because during the dry season, it dries, curls, and looks just like a piece of dead plant laying on it, and then it perks right up every time it rains. Some fiddler crab poo. That's what that is. Yeah, not too appetizing, but whatever. Railroad vine with a purple morning glory flower on it. I put this here so you can see how brown that water is. Mangroves, their leaves fall off. The leaves start to decompose and they produce something called tannic acid. So tannins are tannin color. And so these areas, little puddles, pools around your intracoastals become acidic with tannic acid. And this is a white mangrove, little nectaries on it. When it's on the PowerPoint in a classroom, you can see the nectaries great. I showed you pictures of nectaries a little before. Another fiddler crab. Ooh, the Spanish moss growing on your live oak. All the holes, and the really painful poison ivy. Very, very common on our barrier islands, poison ivy. 3 leaves, can grow freestanding, but more often than not, it's growing up a tree like a vine. When we do our hikes, and some of you may take oceanography, or sorry, marine biology, it would be an honor to have a lot of you in class, because I really do enjoy you guys. We'll pass around the organisms, and you're not allowed to be squeamish like she is. You got to be tough. Here's a Spanish bayonet, very prickly, grows in that habitat. A snag is a dead tree that birds use to nest and hunt with. So there's a bald eagle on a snag, and here's a osprey on a snag. Ospreys are more common than the bald eagles. These guys fight. Sometimes you see them fight. It's really cool. The ospreys don't want the eagles around, so they attack the eagles. They're a lot smaller, and they would lose if it were wrestling, but being it's an aerial battle, they're a little more maneuverable, and they can chase off the eagles quite easily. Owls, and here's a great horned owlet, nest in these trees as well. So I know a spot on Honeymoon Island that the owls love. So maybe 1 out of 3 times I go on a hike there, we see great horned owls. The gopher tortoises, these guys are a keystone species. That means they help other species survive. Now, our Florida ecosystem is fire dependent. We get a lot of fires that sweep through our barrier islands and our scrublands because of lightning strikes. These keystone species allow other species to live simply by living. That's what a keystone species does. These guys dig long burrows. Other animals run and live in those burrows during fire. So they allow animals to survive the frequent fires. Armadillos, they're not a keystone species, but they're running around as well. Here's a rare one, very rarely found. Don't touch them because they're covered with bacteria, and you'll get salmonella. But they're the diamondback terrapin. They're the only estuary terrapin there is. Mangroves, then we find the mangroves. There's the crab again. I doubled this picture maybe. Is that the same crab? It might be a different crab. I don't know. Lichens, prop roots. We find them all on the Arrowhead Flats. Here's some, during the winter, our salt marshes die back a little bit, and in the summer they flourish. So this is a winter shot of the salt marsh. We got our bottlenose dolphins swimming around the bay, and our mangroves all along the Arrowhead Flats. There's black mangrove. Here's our seagrass beds again at the cooler time of the year, and whelk, egg casings, a quahog, all the different seagrasses washed around. This is a sea slug, crown conch, banded tulip, lightning whelk, little shoal of fish. Here's anemones and augurs. In the trees, you have a variety of birds. Wood stork's one of them. Here's mangrove propagules. They're growing on the mangrove. Take a look at this beauty. This is a lightning whelk. The aperture or opening is on the left-hand side, and that's the only snail in our area that has an aperture on the left-hand side. Generally speaking, whelks are predatory, conchs are vegetarians. Conchs, our state shell is a horse conch, and it's a predator, so go figure, we misnamed one. So there's crown conch, pear whelk, another Venus. Ooh, this guy's awesome, the Florida fighting conch. This one's covered in barnacles, but he's a good one. Another lightning whelk, left-hand aperture. Here's a red mangrove propagule. Okay, it's a baby red mangrove tree. They go right on the trees and they fall off. They have a root end, a leaf end, and a stem. So they fall off as a complete small tree. There's your oysters. This is sea pork. It's a tunicate, really cool. The sea pork tunicates, their larvae resemble fish. They're actually chordates. They have a dorsal nerve cord. But when they become adults, they attach themselves and they become filter feeders. And this one looks like chewed up gum. They have a variety of colors and shapes. Our local ones aren't that handsome. This one is kind of an ironic. It's a hermit crab living in a banded tulip, eating a smaller banded tulip. So that's the irony of eating yourself out of house and home, I guess. More hermit crabs, variety of shells. They're not particular. They go for size. We have echinoderms, the brittle star and the sea star living in there, as well as sand dollars, which is here. Sand dollars. We have the occasional sea urchin as well. These are worm egg casings. Oysters growing on a seawall. Scallop, this is a great find. And our friend, the blue crab. Barnacles and limpets grow on things. They're called encrusting organisms. I believe you have an encrusting organism question on there. Sea slug, another type of tunicate growing on seagrass. Anemones. Oh, look, there's a male. You can tell by this plate. That's a male. A female has a big triangle plate underneath there. That is not a triangle. That's a male. Seagrass bred prop scars. That's going to be there for years to come. Horseshoe crab mating. Stingrays. This is the most common fish in Tampa Bay. That is the bay anchovy. Other highlights from little dredges. This guy's cool. He's called a tonguefish. Lives on the bottom. You can see his little eyes there. He's really cool. Here's another cool one that lives on the bottom. A fish that lives on the bottom is called a Dermisol fish. This is a Gulf flounder, stone crab, sea slug, red-clawed hermit crab. Ooh, look at this cowfish. He's cool. Cowfish, pink shrimp, killifish, mahara. Ooh, these guys are relatives of seahorses. These are pipefish. They live in the seagrass beds. Here's a small puffer fish, and he puffed up for us. He was kind of cool. Silverside. Ooh, spider crabs. Spider crabs. They're cool. Here's that tonguefish, a different one, face on. More stingrays. Ooh, these are white pelicans. These guys are seasonal visitors. They migrate down. They're huge. They got like a 5-foot wingspan. They're amazing. Pear whelks, another sea slug. Dolphins. Dolphins are local marine mammal, dolphins and manatees. We see manatees out there on occasion as well. The birds are ospreys, the eagles. Here's a white ibis, and here's a great egret. These guys are frigate birds. They fly around, they look like pterodactyls. I once had a frigate bird snatch a 2-foot trout. They belong to a similar group of birds like the pelicans. They got this big throat pouch. It swallowed it whole. I was shocked. These guys are fairly common in the back estuaries that are a little more freshwater, the spoonbills. You can find them all around there. There's Egmont Key. Growing in between trees, a lot of times you get this crab spider. Look at the beautiful web it spins. Here in the maritime forest, you get owls, more white pelicans, ospreys, dragonflies. There's a nice spotted sea trout out in the flats. Inflated pufferfish, southern puffer, out in the flats. This is a true tulip. That's Joe Malo with Clearwater Marine Aquarium. He's the used to be the education director. He used to come out. We do a whole bunch of work in the estuary together, and he came out and worked with me. And then in the summers, I'd work with him at his educational camps. So we kind of one hand washed the other for a good number of years. Then winter came, and Clearwater Marine Aquariums got more touristy. They're really good. I mean, I'm not going to knock it, but we don't have that relationship we used to. He's still there. He's a great guy. There's our state shell, the horse conch. Look how big that is with orange flesh. There's the operculum. That's his trap door. So that's the horse conch. So that wraps up our virtual trip around Fort DeSoto. You do have some videos to watch. It is optional to do the report. Of course, if you do the report and do a good job, I'll add 5 points to your final grade. So that is, that's bribery. That's bribery. I'm not above it. I'd like you to do the best you can. So I'm offering that to you in return for your good hard work. We're finally done with the unit. We're moving into marine biology. Are there any questions before we dismiss class? No? Well then, have a great weekend, and I will see you all Monday.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.
Yep, bye.
Hey, Professor,
Sir?
what do we do on the assignment that's due on Wednesday, next Wednesday?
Well, I went through that on Monday. Were you in class?
I was gone. I was.
You should watch that video and then email any questions after you watch the video, okay?
Okay.
Very good.